Hello, crypto community. Jeff Kirdeikis here with Kyn Chaturvedi, the Chief Business Development Officer over at TomoChain. Super excited to have you on, Kyn. Thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you very much, Jeff. I'm really excited for being on here and to talk to you about TomoChain and the crypto space. It's a pretty exciting time for me personally.
For sure. I mean, there's a lot of volatility that's happening in the space right now. It's exciting. A lot of projects in the bear market are building right now, and that's been going on since the big crash of 2018. A lot of investors or speculators, they just got hit with a 5% dip within I think it was an hour candle. And we've had this prolonged bear market. I mean, you could argue that we've gone up 100% in the last year or so, but over the big macro trend, we're going down. And I'm curious, how does that influence or impact a project like yours and, how you're building in the space and marketing and the strategy that you're implementing going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So, I mean, the way that we really think about it is, so there is price action, obviously. Investors are in, they're trading. Whether Bitcoin is up or down, though, it really doesn't impact us. And the reason for that is because most of our treasury is held in fiat. So irrespective of the price up and down, whether it's with Bitcoin, TomoChain, other tokens, it doesn't impact us. And the reason for that is because we believe in this space. We've been through multiple cycles already in crypto. To me, this is just another one of those cycles, and we have to see it out. We have to see it through. So, but what's also interesting for me, and actually it's been quite beneficial because of this, at least recently, it's been more of a crypto winter, kind of a little quieter in terms of kind of price movement until yesterday or so. Because of that, it's actually easier to focus on the work, so for me, it's really just been about building relationships, doing integration, bringing on more developers, right? Spreading kind of the awareness of our brand as a technology platform. And I think, so for us, honestly, however Bitcoin moves up or down, it really doesn't impact us that much or at all. And it's just, because I'm in the space, I'm interested. So obviously I pay attention to the pricing, but yeah, it doesn't really make much of an impact as a project.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You guys are smart for being able to hedge in fiat. A lot of crypto diehards would be like, oh, that's not the ethos or the altruistic way, but it's like, well, that's the smart way, because a lot of these projects that raise $10-20 million when ETH was at all-time highs, they're kind of really SOL right now.
It's painful for them, and I understand that. And it's it's a very risky space, right? It's super risky. We're so nascent. So if you can hedge it, if you can ensure you have a runway for a certain number of years, insure it because you know exactly how much cash is sitting in the bank. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, you're taking risk on everything else. Don't take risk on your runway.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to say it. You mentioned we're in a crypto winter right now, and I feel like just like in winter, it's a time to incubate and do the internal work, and then when the summer comes, that's when you go out, you expand, you showcase things. So what ways tangibly do you feel like this is? You mentioned you're doing some more networking and some building, but how is this impacting, I guess you could say, relations with whether it's investors or community members and just marketing space in general?
Sure. So I think the focus really for us is on the technology side of things, what we're building out, and not just that, but also our regional focus. I'll get into that in a little bit, but on the technology side of things, we're 10 months out of mainnet at this point, and I think it's been pretty tremendous in terms of what we've been able to accomplish. As a long-term investor in TomoChain, I think you can see that progress over the last number of months. I mean, so if you want to talk about just the last 2 months alone, right? In August, we were put onto Binance DEX, and we were the second project to earn a Binance.com listing. So we have access to the biggest exchanges now, and this is after 9 months. If you look at our masternode networks, or proof of stake voting consensus, and which is secured by 150 masternodes. And initially, it started off as pretty much a pure community play with some staking companies involved. If you look at it today, it's pretty amazing. 10 months in, we have major companies who are holding masternodes. One of them is KuCoin. They're holding about 15 or so masternodes, and I'm pretty sure Binance is going to be coming in pretty soon too. Along with HashQuark, Kobo Wallet, one of the largest Chinese wallets there is, and there are other players as well. So what's happening is, even though it may be crypto winter, right? If you look at who's investing in TomoChain, who wants to be part of the masternode system, which essentially will eventually determine the governance of TomoChain, right?
Yeah.
You have these large players coming in. They wouldn't invest the time and effort if they didn't see strong potential in the technology itself and in what we can accomplish. Now, and I think the smart investors understand that we have a really strong community, and I think most of them, they get that. Obviously, the price movements up and down, you know, it tugs at the heartstrings sometimes a little bit, right? Yeah. But if you now if you move beyond just the tech side of things, I think one of the key things that is often overlooked in this space when we think about blockchain technology is the importance of the region that you're actually focusing on. So I'll give you an example. So with when it comes to Ethereum, obviously, you know, the West primarily is heavily focused on Ethereum. You have a tremendous amount of developers basically on the platform. You have DApps coming out on it. You know, DevCons, right? There's a tremendous amount of support for Ethereum, which is great, of course. Now, if you look in Asia, we have a number of different platforms from TomoChain, Neo, you know, Ontology, the other Chinese blockchains. What I'm starting to see is that the Asian blockchains are looking to work together in particular. You know, in Korea for Clayton, right? It's not about a one winner take all ordeal. We're a tiny crypto pond, honestly. Yes. You look at it, right? I just a few weeks ago, I was looking at, I believe it was DappRadar. They did an article. And the article was showing how many DApps, daily active users, greater than 1,000. How many DApps are there with more than 1,000 daily active users? Yeah. And Tron, 10. EOS, 10. Okay. It was to the point that you have like, it's nothing, there's nothing wrong with Tron or EOS. It's the fact that we are really that tiny. It was to the point that table that they were reporting on, they even had a column for greater than 100 daily active users, right? Greater than 100 is relevant today, right? So my point is this, is that when we talk about the technology side of things, we're 10 months out of mainnet, we're building, but there's a strong regional focus here. We're centered in Vietnam, and we are the largest public blockchain in Southeast Asia, and likely the most reputable as well. We're trying to grow this particular market, and if you look at all the people that are trying to enter, the other Asian countries, India, Korea, China, are all coming and trying to do something in Vietnam. And the reason is because our retail investors, number one, are not dead. They're actively trading. There are a number of conferences and events happening here all the time. There's a lot of money coming into the space as well, into Vietnam. And we, at TomoChain, we're actually working with the regulators. We're advising them. You know, there was a symposium about a month and a half, 2 months ago, where our founder, Long Vuong, he went there and he did a presentation on putting together a sandbox in Hanoi, Vietnam, which is where I'm based, which is where we're primarily based. And that's hopefully going to take place next year. So it's not just the tech, it's also where you're located and how you can capture that market. And I still think of it as a business. It's right now we're a business, we're a startup. Until we can all become truly decentralized, the only way to become relevant is to try to understand your market and try to work with others, in my opinion. Collaboration to me makes the most sense. And we've been communicating that to our investors, and I believe they understand that as well. So it's a long-term play, for sure.
Yeah, and like you say, we're so incredibly new, and I think a lot of people in the crypto space think, oh, we've already had this big run to 20K and everyone's already heard about it. But you mentioned when you're dealing with numbers that are, how many have more than 10 daily active? It's such an incredibly small number, and I fully agree that this feeling of competition in between platforms is just so hilarious, really, because there's such a massive market ready to be tapped into. And when you can create that synergy and work together, then you're able to tackle the market together for sure. Eventually over time, you know, you look 5 years in the future, there will be more of that competition. But right now it's just like, it's a big blue ocean of open opportunity for everyone. And the people who can create these synergies are really going to prosper. So how do you guys go about creating synergies in between these different chains? I know, you know, to kind of like merge projects isn't really a viable option. What is that strategy to create these synergies?
Sure. Sure. So we're actually working on that as we speak, and we have relationships in place that will hopefully soon be announced. But really, I think the secret of this is, so my background is as a game developer. I used to make games before the touchscreen based smartphones. We're talking about the number pad, all right?
Yeah.
So
what's your claim to fame game?
So mine, you probably wouldn't have heard of it. Conga Bugs was one of the big ones. I pitched a project to Microsoft Game Studios, which was developed for the XNA platform, which was basically indie game developers making games for the Xbox 360. I'm dating myself here. But our company that I worked for worked directly on like Forza Motorsport, all the car models basically on that front. So we had a services play, we had developer play, and I was doing all the development side of things. Anyway, so as a former game dev, one of the biggest problems that we faced was not just making games. We weren't the best marketers. We weren't the best at distribution. I used to have to put together these product decks, which are like marketing decks, basically. And I'd go to the telcos, like the mobile network operators. This is before you had an app store, to say, hey, take my game, and give me some cut of it. It was really hard to even get the games out there and then to market them. In crypto, for one thing, the idea really is that I think all the major public chains were lacking developers. If you looked in Osaka, there was a talk that was asking, how do we get to 1 million developers? How do we get to 1 million? How does Ethereum get to 1 million? And it's true. There are very few devs. And I don't think poaching makes sense. That's too much effort for very little return. I think the idea here is trying to help the ecosystem by onboarding more developers, highlighting what the value is for blockchain, but not just doing that as an individual entity, but as a consortium of sorts, working together. And the idea here is that by working together, having hackathons, having educational seminars in respective countries, you're educating developers about blockchain. And because it's a consortium, because you're working with each other, that also means that you can help with bringing DApps from one platform, educating how you bring it to the other platforms.
Gotcha.
Why would you do that? Again, regional play. Because, for example, we understand Southeast Asia. Clayton understands South Korea. Neo understands China, right?
Yes.
So what happens is you get access to different distribution channels and you get direct support from the projects themselves. I think that is part of the value. So for me, as a former game dev, I would have loved if a platform came to me and said, hey, let me help you with bringing your application to our platform. And you know what? There are other platforms we'll help you with as well. We'll help you with marketing. We'll help you with distribution. We'll help you with localization. That's what I want. I had to work my ass off to get all that stuff done on my own at the time. So I think of it from that perspective, not just for game DApps, but DApps in general, right? I think we need more support. I have spoken with, so we have had success in terms of bringing DApp developers from other blockchains to TomoChain. We didn't say ditch the other blockchain. We said just come over. And we gave them reasons for why. And for one, we have Tron developers who've come on board. We have Ethereum developers who've come on board. Why? Because we provided support. And if you look at DApp.com, you will actually see daily active users on, say, our version is consistently growing in a Y equals X, kind of linear fashion for daily active users because we're invested, right? And I think that's what's really important here. So it's not just about trying to poach developers from one platform to the other, promising tons of money to build brand new games. When that happens, developers will make the game. Once the money runs out, they leave. That happens. Not everybody, but it often happens, right? Yeah. So you have to think about the right incentive structure, the right incentive model, which can help developers and yourself as a platform to grow over the next several years. I want to build relationships. I don't want to just pay somebody to make a game or make a DApp, I think. So I think that's kind of the focus here when it comes to working with other blockchains and how I think it can work.
For sure. And you mentioned, when you're developing this game and you're launching it to kind of a distribution agent, I guess is my way of understanding it. it's
Sure.
they're putting an exclusivity agreement on it. And so what essentially is happening in the blockchain space right now is what you're trying to create as an ecosystem is this non-exclusivity agreement where we're actually supporting. So it's not, so for example, if you went to PlayStation, you said, here's my game, PlayStation would say, awesome, we're going to link you in with Xbox and we're going to get this thing launched on all platforms.
I think that's a great way of putting it. And that's exactly correct. It's not about exclusivity. It's about saying, let's help you get on all platforms. And don't forget the Switch. That's my favorite system of choice.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, so like exactly. And the idea is that, so in the traditional gaming sense, we call them publishers, and the publisher's like, hey, yeah, we're going to help open up all of these channels for you. And that's what I want to do, you know? And so that's part of the idea of doing these kinds of partnerships. Yeah. And so I think moving forward, the other thing you're probably going to see is an attempt to do things like interoperability, where it's not just a title or an application porting from one blockchain to the other. There are going to be attempts to actually have it so that a DApp launched on one platform can also automatically interact with other ones, but that I believe is going to take some time.
Right.
We may see.
Yeah, that's what I try to conceptualize. When you have, the code for one platform is drastically different than code for another. Then how do you need to create some kind of bridge in between those two?
Exactly.
Launch the bridge needs to get built, and who's creating that bridge, I guess, is a big question.
Correct. And I know that these types of bridges are in the works. But the thing is that for the time being, that's great. But I think that still ecosystem development, collaborating, irrespective when an interoperability play comes in, still working in the same way together as an alliance to bring on more DApp developers and to help them with localizing and regional focuses. I think that's going to be important. But yeah, hopefully, I think the narrative in the next couple of years, maybe next year or two, it's going to start being interoperability. But we'll see how it goes and how it takes off, if it does, in the way that I think we're trying to imagine it to.
Yeah, and because I'm not too development inclined, or I don't code. And so my mind tries to wrap around, how does this tangibly work? Because for example, if you have all these things where you need to build that interoperability section, or if there's a possibility to have one overarching code, and then can link in with different platforms. And if so, then do you lose functionality? Because I know different types of code allow for different types of flexibility and features.
Sure. I mean, I think conceptually the idea is that, it's sort of like, I think of it like sort of an API of sorts. So you've developed some code and you simply plug in to another system. Now that system is supposed to handle the token economics. It's supposed to handle the ability for transactions to take place on, say, another blockchain, which you don't have to necessarily worry about. And the idea would be that I think part of it is that if you're playing, say, a game, which is intended for one platform, but the idea here is that even if you're holding a token from another platform, it can work. And that bridge in the middle between these two blockchains is what's supposed to handle that. It's still being worked on by a number of parties. No one's figured it out just yet. I think obviously Polkadot has an idea of how this can work. Ultimately, for them, like they're basically having blockchain sort of plug in. There's a bridge which comes from the outside in to Polkadot, and then there's another one where you're actually running a sort of micro version of your public blockchain inside of Polkadot, right? That's the faster approach. But in terms of how it works in reality, it's going to take a little time to figure out. So I think let's give it a year or so, and we'll see exactly how things manifest themselves.
And I really love how you're coming at it with a synergistic approach, and we see eye to eye 100% on that. I feel a lot of people in the crypto space tend to have not necessarily the builders, but the investors and the retail. They tend to have more of a cultish personality, like Team Ethereum or Team Tron. And I feel when you have that kind of personality or that kind of culture in the crypto space, you need to have distinguishing factors that set your project apart from others. For sure, I agree, synergy is the way to do it, and then you don't need to stand out too much if you're all localized and regional. What would you say, though, are some of those features that set you apart from the different platforms?
Sure. So if we talk from the tech side of things, like today, like I said, we're 10 months out of mainnet. We're live. We have project already on us, right? So it's not that we're in testnet. Our consensus mechanism allows for 2,000 TPS, 2-second block time. What does that mean, essentially, in reality? It means that if you're let's say that you're paying for your coffee at a Starbucks, since this is a common example, right? Now, if you're going with a traditional blockchain, where it may take minutes for when you send a token and it's actually confirmed, received by the receiver, that process can take 5 to 30 minutes. What does that mean? If you're using, say, current Ethereum as an example, not future Ethereum, but current Ethereum, you would have 3 lines. One is you walk up to the cashier and you say, okay, I'm going to order my cup of coffee, right? You say, okay, great. You take out your wallet and you say, I'm going to send a transaction. I'm going to send some tokens to you. Now you have a second line where you're sitting there waiting for confirmation. 5 minutes, 30 minutes, right? Finally, when the confirmation goes through, go to the third line, which is where the barista will be hopefully making your cup of coffee, and then
hopefully it's not cold by then.
Right, exactly, right? So that's the reality of that. For us, it's not like that. For us, it's just like if you want to walk up and you want to pay by cash, you want to pay by credit card, because it takes 2 seconds. So essentially, you'd open up your app and you'd send some tokens. Boom, 2 seconds later, maybe 3. It'll register and you can move on with your life. And ground reality is it's already being used as a payment mechanism. And I'll tell you a couple things that are happening on that front. So for one, because of the speed factor today, for one, we are integrated into a subscription service called WisePass. And what we have these adoption nights where it's going to soon be once a week, we go to a bar of sorts and people can buy local Singa beer for about $1.50 in Tomo, in our token, basically, using the app. They just pay for it. And so we have a night we call adoption night. We talk about cool stuff that's happening in general, and then we say, buy as much beer as you want to. The subscription service also allows people to go to, say, Starbucks and get discounted coffee. It's soon going to allow for people to buy lipsticks of all things, which is interesting too.
Right.
And there are other things
with specific like POS services, and that's how you're providing these off ramps.
So yeah, basically it's a third-party service that already has existing relationships with different retailers, right? And so it allows for crypto payment because the idea of the crypto payment actually purchases the subscription, which then is then converted into fiat in the back end and then pays the vendor, right? That's kind of how it works right now. Regulation right now it's still in this grayish area. So one thing that's very clear is that in Vietnam, just like in many other countries, the only currency that's accepted is the local currency, Vietnamese dong. So even so in the tourist areas, if you go to it, you'll see that some vendors do allow for you to pay in United States dollars, as an example, or euros. They're not allowed to technically, but they do just because they make it easier for the tourists. But legally, we cannot pay for a service in cryptocurrency. It's not legal. So we have to find other ways that make sense. And this is the case for many countries. It's not just in Vietnam. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to get people ready with the idea that you can use crypto. There's a utility beyond just a utility token. There's a payment factor here. That's one of them. The second one is probably one of the most successful projects to launch on TomoChain's called Trip, T-R-I-I-P. And they're a local travel services company. And what happens with them is that they were on Shark Tank in Vietnam last year, I think sometime. And they did very well there. They raised some funding. And the idea is that you can use their token, which is built on TomoChain, to purchase, basically vacations. And they've actually been doing very well. They have a significant user base, some thousands of users basically that are actively using their protocol today. And this is in crypto, which is pretty tremendous actually, that they've managed to build a business so early in this space on that. So it's really about, so using it today is actually doable. 2 seconds, for confirmation makes a difference in order to do this, especially if you're doing it in person, right? Yeah. And even within our DApps as well, when you have to say pay through Tomo or whatever it might be, you don't really wait. And that makes a big difference. I'm sure understand when you're playing a game, right? If you're waiting for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds for the load time, you know how excruciating that is, right? Now imagine having to wait for 5-10 minutes like it used to be. I remember there was a single speed CD-ROM drive. I was loading up Warcraft way back in the day, and it was like old school computer, and I had a CD-ROM drive, and man, it literally took 5 minutes to load. There was cinematics basically, so it was 5 minutes to load that, and then to finally get into the game was another 2 minutes of like loading. It was crazy. Now I can't imagine doing that waiting to buy something at a vendor and having to wait 5, 10, 15 minutes and not even actually knowing how long it's going to take. It doesn't make sense.
That's right. Yeah, no, it would never happen. You've got that loading bar going across the screen, you're blowing on it, giving the gravity effect. Trying to take it down.
Exactly, right? So that's the reality, man. And so I think today, the advantage we really have is that we are on ground. We're being used for payments. We're being used by DApp developers. We have tokens already built on us, and we have tremendous credibility, particularly in Southeast Asia. We have relationships with banks, retailers, the government as well. We know all of the communities in this space, in our region, basically. We have touch points with everyone. So to me, that is a tremendous advantage, especially when you look to Vietnam and Southeast Asia as the next hot market. Where there are obviously many people who are talking about how big it can be, but it's quite possible that Southeast Asia will be the next kind of the front runner for the next bull run. I'm not saying that it'll basically outdo the other countries, but in terms of the front running, not the front running like on an exchange, but being a front runner, I think you're going to start seeing Southeast Asia is going to be a big story on the next bull run, which is why we have China, India, Korea, and others trying to come into Vietnam, setting up shop to do that here.
And I think what a lot of people in the West don't realize is the East is using a lot of these mobile payment applications already. They've already moved a lot of their funds off of bank accounts, whether it's Gojek, Grab, Alipay, whatever it may be. Everyone's using these mobile banks. They're used to this culture and less fees for transaction and instantaneous things. So I see that.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
that's a really good point, actually. If you look at it in the East, whereas in the West, when we grew up, we had a desktop computer, dial-up internet, eventually moved to broadband, eventually got our mobile phones, and years after that, finally had internet on our phones where we can browse the net and watch videos. The East, like in India, they bypassed the whole having a computer dial-up broadband thing, and the masses came on board when we had smart with internet connectivity, and that's kind of where. Sorry, I just got a call. Apologize for that.
Okay.
So I don't know what happened, if I disappeared or not. So anyway, so yeah, in India, basically, that's exactly what we've seen. We've seen that people have jumped over the computer dial-up broadband world, and they moved directly into smartphones with unlimited internet to watch videos, do emails, and things like that. So, and that's exactly what's happening on the payment side. I was in China last month, and I was sort of dismayed a little bit because my cash was not accepted everywhere, and my credit card was not accepted everywhere. Or if my credit card was accepted, I had to go to some back corner of like a grocery store where they had all these all these POS systems, right? And then to get my card swiped, and then I had to come all the way back to the front of the cash register to provide my receipt. And I was like, why am I going all the way to the back of the grocery store for this, right? And so yeah, China is moving towards facial recognition technology, but today Alipay and WeChat Pay are the ways to go. I mean, and unfortunately for me as an American, I don't have a Chinese bank account, so I'm kind of locked out of that system. In Vietnam, it's largely cash-based still. I think over 95% of payments are still done in cash, but if you look at the vendors in Hanoi, which is where I am, or Ho Chi Minh City, which is the other major economic hub for Vietnam, you're seeing it reminds me of the Bay Area back in like 2011, 2012, where every store had like 10 different QR code based payment formats, basically, right? Like you had to download 10 different apps and you had 10 different ways of paying for it, right? So that's happening too. So crypto, you're right. Coming back to it, the users that will move from pure cash, they may end up jumping over some of the debit card, credit card things. Some of them will, and they may start being happy with just doing crypto, right? If you can get them on board, if you can show them how to come onto crypto without needing to use, a debit card, credit card, then it definitely is a possibility for that. But I think there's still room, at least in Vietnam, there's still room for, say, debit cards and credit cards, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in the crypto space have an illusion that once crypto enters, that everything is going to go away instantly. And I just don't feel that's going to
No,
be the case at all. It's going to be,
no.
other than 10 QR codes, it's going to be 11 QR codes. And the battle will be then, okay, what system do you want to subscribe to? Which is giving you the ease of use, the
Mhm.
security, the nice UI, and low fees. And if crypto can beat all of those factors for the other applications, then we stand a fighting chance. But until that happens, and off ramps is the other thing as well. That's what I'd love to talk about. I don't think we have a fighting chance. And you said, we talked about off ramps a little bit. You know, you have Trip, they're doing flights, you're doing lipstick and beers. I feel, you know, to go individually one by one, it's a really arduous and almost unscalable process. You know, how do you, I guess, stand to that, or
Mhm.
you know what I'm trying to say here? I'm lost for words.
Absolutely.
But what do you
You know,
do
I
to
understand.
like a scalable solution that is just like one-stop shop for everything?
Absolutely. So I'll help you. I'll help answer that. What I think is the solution. No, but you're right that going one by one vendor to another vendor and having them accept crypto is a very slow process. You need to provide something that, number one, is attractive enough for mainstream users to want to use. And number two, it's easy for them to use. Changing user behavior is one of the most challenging things you can do. And
Yes.
onboarding people to crypto, you know, you have to know what crypto is. You need to know where to first purchase your crypto, which exchange, what's an exchange, how do you get money onto it, fiat, how do you then get it into Bitcoin or whatever else, what's a wallet, what are these weird numbers, you know, that represents my wallet address, how do I convert that to another crypto, and then how do I convert that crypto to start to be able to be used into a DApp? That's just in the DApp space alone, right? That friction has to be removed as much as possible. That's so, and what people are used to is they're, you know, right now, if you're using PayPal in the West, if you're using a debit card or credit card, if you're using Samsung Pay, you know, where you can, you know, you basically have your existing credit card, which can then just be touched onto any existing POS and you can pay for stuff, right? You're using existing user behavior, and that's the key, I think. So for one, how do we bring more people on board? Well, the true use case for crypto to begin with has always been on the payment side of things, right? So how do people traditionally make payments? Okay, cash, fine. Credit cards and QR codes, they're used to that. So I think the idea is, this is why DeFi or finance in particular is a big focus right now. If you look at Korea, there are two companies. One is called Terra Money, and what they're doing, they've issued like a stable coin, but what they're doing is they have a service called Chai, and Chai is being installed in a variety of online and offline vendors to allow people to pay. They're providing incentives for you to use their service, but it acts like any other payment gateway. You can have a fiat on-ramp, right? You can transfer money from your bank accounts, and you can do an off-ramp too. You can take money back out. But the idea is that there's an incentive for you to keep your money and keep using that particular application. You don't think of it like crypto. You don't treat it like crypto. You don't advertise it to your users as crypto. You just say, there's an on-ramp, an off-ramp. We have access to all these vendors. And by using our service, just like another QR code-based company, a payment company, there are benefits for it, right?
Yes.
Think of it like that. Then you become just another player in terms of the end user. You're just another player in the space. Now, what can you offer me that's better than any of the other guys, right? And they don't even realize by using your service, they're in crypto. Now, another one is Clayton, probably the most well-known project in Korea, backed by Kakao. Kakao Talk is like Korea's equivalent of WeChat in China. They're huge. They are integrating a wallet into their mobile app, and which will allow people to use cryptocurrency ideally for payments, maybe sometime next year when the regulation comes into play. They're taking their time. But both of these companies are focused on payments because that's a low-hanging fruit. That is what's logical when it comes to mainstream users. Libra, I mean, come on. I mean, it's all about payments, right?
Yes.
There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. Because if you need to onboard millions of users, you need to go and figure out how to do it, and that is through payments right now. That's through payments, which is why we went from Bitcoin as a store of value to potentially payment. We went into the whole ICO space, raising money for utility-based tokens. focusing on storage or internet or whatever else there may be. And now we've come kind of sort of full circle back to a DeFi focus, right? Spending, borrowing, lending. There's a reason for that. I think that thesis of payment is what's needed. So then once you have millions and billions of people on, it becomes easier for you to continue to build out your platforms, to add more DApps of other natures, of focusing on other ways of decentralizing different technologies, security tokens. It becomes easier because now you have an install base to do that. Enterprise, right, as well. It becomes easier then. Long-winded answer, I think, but that's kind of I think that payment and is really the real way to do this.
I fully agree, and that's a really intelligent pivot, and even if it's not a pivot, a direction that you're taking it. You look at Ethereum, and their motto is always, "We're not a payment solution. We're for applications only," and that niches can be powerful, but they also can be limiting. That being said, I feel that there's pros and cons to integrating payments alongside the DApps. I believe there's a lot more pros to have the DeFi side, like you guys are exploring. But what do you see as some of the cons, whether it's volatility, or do you see that there's any downsides to introducing the payment side besides like more development work needed into TomoChain?
Yeah, so I mean, for one, obviously, we're dealing with a number of unknowns. You have your regulation, right? How is that going to work with regulation, right? And how do you get users to start using your service? And yeah, how do you deal with volatility? So I think the volatility side, the other thing that we're all seeing is a huge influx of stablecoins, right? Now, you have ones which are claiming to be more decentralized, others which are clearly backed by collateral. But the reason for that is because at the end of the day, it all kind of comes back to the same thesis of, if you want to avoid the volatility, if you want to make it look and feel like any other method of payment, then that's how you have to treat it. So I think, the approach kind of comes back to, it's challenging. Regulation is the biggest problem. But I think we have to, again, mimic what end users would expect, what a normal user would expect, not what a crypto user would expect. So when it comes to making payments, right now we're doing it in, say, Tomo or Trip. But I think moving forward, we're going to have to look at finding a way to peg it to some kind of a basket of goods or a specific currency in order to make it easier for people to transition. Because if they transition from their fiat into a crypto token, which can be volatile, that would be very challenging for them to understand how to deal with that. And I think that if you look at certain borrowing lending platforms, they're taking in the crypto, and part of what they're doing is they're giving users, say, a 5%, 6%, 7% return, which is something you don't hear of anywhere in the West anymore. I mean, I'm losing money keeping my money in, say, Bank of America right now. Just by holding it there every year, I'm losing out to inflation, and on top of there are other fees as well. Right? And you are too, I'm sure, wherever you are. There are very few places where you're actually making good returns. So I think that, so the other aspect here is that of incentivizing users to use it, and is that if you can offer those additional returns, and you have it in a place which is somewhat safe, which means it has to be somewhat regulated, it has to be regulated, and it has to be easy to get money in and out, and it has to be able to be used, then it becomes easier, I think, for people to come on board. But these are the interesting thing about the space, and the exciting thing too, is because of the number of unknowns, it makes me want to work on it that much harder because no one's done it. Sure. No one's succeeded yet. We have ideas, we have examples, but nothing at mass scale as of yet, right? So figuring it out and working through these problems is honestly part of the fun. And the reason why I want to be working on it too. If it was already solved and I had the answers, then okay, I'll just be another me too.
And I feel when you're building something, you're in your own power, you're striving forward, and the pace that you go is within your control. And so the more you put in, the more you get out. I feel especially in DeFi and when you're dealing with regulations directly, it kind of becomes a little more outside of your own control and potentially a little more frustrating. Are you finding that, or are you guys exploring that avenue right now and just starting to hit all these roadblocks? Because for regulations, I'd imagine that you have to go into more or less every country individually and kind of state your case and wait for the reply? Or are you guys using Libra as like the ambulance that kind of parts the ways through the traffic just come up behind the ambulance?
So I think to begin with, we're starting off in the place that we know best, which is Vietnam.
Right.
As I mentioned, we have very good relationships with multiple government entities here, and that includes the bureau that's going to be managing the whole crypto side of things too. We also have relationships with, and in Asia, one of the biggest things, it is about personal relationships. And so the other side is having relationships with financial institutions. We have strong relationships there. We have strong relationships with developers, and we have strong relationships with retailers, retail space, basically, vendors. So I think you have to start with that. And there are going to be a number of unknowns, and that's fine. Get a model that can work. Once that model is working to a degree that you believe it can scale, then you look to try to aggressively move into other markets. The other markets you have to explore in the meantime. As long as your thesis is playing out in your current market, you can continue to explore opportunities in the other markets. So when you're ready, and if you realize that, say, Singapore is ready, but Thailand is not ready, just as an example, okay, great. Then we do Singapore next, right? Or vice versa, whatever makes sense. And so I think that's the way you have to do it. First, understand it from your own space, and then expand out. And this goes back to business 101 from day one. I mean, Nintendo, back in the early 80s, when they launched their original Nintendo Entertainment System, they did it only in New York City and pretty much only in one store. And they tested it out there, and they did a bunch of events. They tried to figure out what was working. Once they figured out what was working, then they went, boom, we're going to have an NES in every part of the world, in every part of the United States, basically, right? Then they started targeting other big markets, and it worked because they kept testing that thesis. I'm a big gamer. I think you already know that. So, and so I take after, a lot of my lessons, the way I operate is based on what I saw at that time period. And no matter what era you're in, whether you have the internet, you have mobile phones, doesn't matter. Often business is done in the same way. And one part of it is relationships, the other part is testing the market itself.
I think the angle that you're going at it is really intelligent, actually. Rather than trying to go too wide, too fast, we're going to do one thing in one area really well. And if it's scalable from there, then that's the right move. And meanwhile, you have other projects in their own localities and nationalities that are, moving that regulatory needle into the green, that you can then come in as well and create synergies or healthy competition, which I think is always good in the space.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, we talked a lot about DeFi. I feel like we didn't touch much on the application side. But yeah, and so I'd love to dive into that.
Sure.
So, right now we do not have many DApps being built on these platforms, and things are pretty slow to progress, to build. Do you feel that that's just because of the lack of developers right now, or is it a lack of UI, UX? What's the big friction point? And, we saw that boom and bust in 2017, 2018, and there's a lot of excitement that is now weaned away. Where do you see the evolvement of decentralized applications going forward?
Sure. So for one, there are very few developers in this space compared to, technology development in other spaces, right? We have a handful of developers, honestly. And the big reason for that is because we don't have enough end users. If I'm going to be developing an application, spending tens of thousands of dollars a month to develop an app, and then tens of thousands of dollars to maintain it, then I need to have an ROI of some sort. If I'm not making an ROI because I only have a user base of 50 people, well, maybe I shouldn't be putting my money towards investing in this space. I should be investing somewhere else. Yeah. I think that's the biggest challenge right now. And again, it comes back to the friction we were talking about. How do you get DApp users on board? And that is a 12-step process or whatever it might be, right? So it's like every step of that, as we call it, the conversion funnel, at every stage of friction, you lose about 50%, right, of the audience. And so by the time you get down to develop users who understand how to use EOS and how do you actually interact with EOS Knights, and it's just like you're down to the tiny hardcore bit, right? Of course, this hardcore bit, they do spend a lot. So that is one thing that's true. DApp users on average spend a lot more, hundreds of dollars basically on any given DApp, as opposed to the traditional mobile app space when you go to Play Store or you go to the iOS App Store, right? So one thing is we need to find a way to bring on more users. How do we do that? this is again where I think the thesis is often, my thesis is a little bit different than what I've been seeing with some of my fellow colleagues. And that is, I don't think it's about bringing users into the crypto pond. I think it's about bringing blockchain and plugging it into existing applications in a way that the end user, as we discussed a little bit earlier, the end user doesn't even know they're on the blockchain. And this is kind of comes to what we're actually developing right now, or what we've already launched. So in order to do this, right? So the idea is that if you're going to onboard a user, right now with a DApp, you need to have a wallet, you need to have a wallet address. Now replace that with an email and password, right? Things are going to have to be managed in the background right now. So I think the idea is that it's not truly decentralized in the sense that users may not initially be in direct control of their private keys unless they, you can see them maybe like in an advanced option. But the idea is that you onboard users with username and passwords, emails and passwords. When they have an experience where, say, if they're in a game and they're being issued virtual currency, as you would in almost any free-to-play game, there are ways to issue them blockchain tokens instead. TomoChain is fast enough for this. We can actually do that. We can actually offer virtual tokens that will be sent to a user's account when they're playing a game. They earn them, it gets put into their account automatically. We have a tech that's called TomoZ Zero Friction. It's a protocol that essentially allows you to issue a token where the gas fee is paid by the token itself. Traditionally, like say with Ethereum, if you want to send a token that's on Ethereum, you also have to hold some Ethereum to pay for the gas fee, right?
Right.
So yeah, which is that's another friction point. So we've removed that actually. Huge friction point. We've removed that. Now, it's not free. It's not a free transaction. But the idea is that if you issue, say, the Jeff token, right, which is what we call a TRC21 standard, the idea is that when you send me that token, all right, the fee that you pay will be in that token, meaning that maybe you send me one token, but I receive 0.9999999 of the token. That's one way of doing it. The other way is we could actually have it so when you issue the token, there is actually no fee taken from the token itself. What actually happens in the background, there's a pool of Tomo that any token issuer has to deposit, all right? So whether you deposit 10 Tomo or 1,000 Tomo, it sits there. Now what happens then is when you send me that token, a portion of the actual gas fee that should be paid to the masternodes is taken from that pool and paid to the masternodes.
Yes.
That's how it works. That's simple as that, right? So it's not free. But the idea is that you're removing the friction from the end user. So now we go back to our gaming example. We've integrated blockchain, email, password. Our token, the virtual currency, is actually a blockchain token, and then everything there is self-managed. Now there are ways of also doing the same thing for NFTs as well, where it's handled in the back end. The end user doesn't have to spend gas. He doesn't have to know his wallet address. You can integrate marketplaces in there too eventually. You can have stores where you have fiat on-ramp to buy this virtual currency if you want to, like as you have in traditional free-to-play games if you want that model, right? There are ways to do this. It's just that, and so I think it's about bringing blockchain to the end user, not bringing the end user to blockchain. And that's what I'm working on personally at TomoChain. I think that's the way to do it.
I fully agree with that. One question I have on you mentioned, so let's say a Jeff token is issued or whatever token. The liquidity on that token is likely going to be next to nil. So as a masternode, why would I want to use my CPU power to validate this Jeff token when I'm unable to liquidate it? And then do I just have this slush pool of thousands of different non-liquid tokens that I'm holding?
Sure. So, so for one, the masternodes themselves, what's unique about, I think, about TomoChain is the masternodes don't have to concern themselves with whichever tokens have been issued on TomoChain. Irrespective of the tokens that are transferred, sent from one wallet to another, the masternodes are paid the same amount of Tomo. It doesn't really matter because, again, when you issue your Jeff token, you have to also put a pool of Tomo that will be paying the masternode. So the masternode is not going to distinguish between your token or my token, right? It doesn't matter how liquid or illiquid it is. If you send it, the masternode is still getting paid. And so why does a masternode care what token it is, right? If it was sent, it got paid. Now, in terms of liquidity, so it depends on what you want to do with your token as well, right? I mean, you can just hold a stash of it. But we know we had some community members that what they do is they create their own token. They tip each other in our Telegram channel just for the fun of it, right? They do that, and they do airdrops and things like that to experiment for the time being. Those tokens may never ever go onto an exchange, so it may not even matter that it's easy to get. It may just be a fun token. But if you issue this token, say in the example of a game, like we were talking about, right? Then the idea is that you have a repository, an address with all of these tokens. Every time someone decides to go into your store and say buy a $5 pack of your virtual currency, well, then you send it from that wallet address, your wallet address, to the user's wallet address, basically. So there's no trading happening, but it represents some economic value within the game, within the frame of the game itself. Right? It actually allows you to do something in that game, as an example. So there, it doesn't really matter if it's on an exchange or not. It doesn't need to be, because the use case is not for it to be traded. The use case is for it to be actually used within an application, right? So then again, we kind of move to away from the idea that everything needs to be traded, that everything needs to have a fluctuating value compared to United States dollars or any other fiat currency. And there, you don't have to worry about, the liquidity in the sense of a trading token, right? I'm not sure if that answered your question or not.
It 100% does. Yeah. When you give value in an internal economy, then there's no reason nor need to liquidate that into an external economy of Ether or fiat.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you guys have, your local and your niche there, but you have these 3 branches, it feels like, and maybe you can add one more if I'm not covering them all, but it seems like there's DeFi, there's the token side of things in terms of like decentralized applications. There's also this integration with games. Do you feel that there's a 4th, or is that kind of a broad summary?
Yeah. Of course. We also, so we have 3 main offices. So one is in Hanoi, which is where the main developer office is. We have one in Singapore, and we have one in Japan. Now, the Japan one, it's called TomoChain Japan. It focuses exclusively on enterprise. So we have been doing enterprise-based work it's a separate entity. It's a joint venture. So the CEO of TomoChain Japan has over 10 years of enterprise experience. And so we've been actively working on developing some pretty big POCs right now. It's under NDA, I can't talk about it right now, but some pretty major POCs for large companies in Japan at this point. So that's the other thing we're working on. Enterprise is a very long-term play. And we'll have to see where it generates value, how it generates value, how long it takes until it generates value, when will enterprises really want to onboard. But there are real projects happening right now in Tokyo, in TomoChain Japan, and so enterprise is the other focus that we have.
Gotcha. And so when you look 2-3 years into the future, or even just in the foreseeable future, on what you're the most excited about right now on your roadmap, you've got a lot of hands in a lot of pots, but you personally, like, what are you really excited about? And this is your driving passion right now. Sure.
So for me, again, I always come back to, the gaming side of things. That's my personal passion. That was my first passion. Blockchain is my second passion, merging together. So for me personally, it's about seeing not 10 DApps with 1,000 plus, 1,000 users a day. It's about integrating TomoChain into thousands of games, which have thousands of users each, so that we no longer ever see that statistic again. I want to see, because TomoChain, essentially, it's a computer, okay? It's a distributed computer. I want that blockchain to be used, that computer to be used. And I think integrating blockchain into games is one way of doing that. And I think that, so for me personally, I would love to see thousands of games using TomoChain technology where the users don't even know they're using TomoChain, because that's not relevant. That's not relevant at all. It's just like if you're an investor in, say, Apple, you own shares, right? Just like if you're a TomoChain investor, you own TomoChain. The difference is TomoChain can be used as a utility token too. But if I'm buying Apple products, but I don't own Apple shares, does it matter? It doesn't matter, right? And so it's the same thing, that if an end user is using TomoChain technology without actually knowing it, in this case, obviously with Apple, it's branded, but in the sense that if they're using my platform, or let's say a website is being hosted on Amazon S3, the end user doesn't need to know that the website that they're using is hosted on Amazon S3. Maybe that's a better example here, right? And it's the same idea. As long as TomoChain, the blockchain, is being used and being heavily used, I think that's where the value comes from at the end of the day. So that's for me personally. But the other aspect of it is, which is definitely TomoChain's passion, and I know Long's passion too, is the DeFi aspect, which is making sure that we have a lot of people using TomoChain, the blockchain, for payment solutions, whether it's using Tomo itself or a token that's issued on TomoChain. But the idea of having a mass market of users who are able to buy, sell, borrow, lend, that whole shebang, basically using TomoChain as that background platform.
Yeah, I think the DeFi play is a really, really strong one because it adds so much utility to the token itself. Granted, there's tons in the gaming space. Just, you look at a lot of these valuations right now in the smart contract platforms, billion-dollar valuations, $500 million valuations. And I just think how much use needs to happen for this kind of valuation? You look at EOS, well, I don't know what it's, maybe 2 billion right now. And the number of users or DApps is just so negligible. It's like, how is that really worth that much? And that's not even talking equity. So I think you guys have a really smart play to have a wide basket of utility for this token.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I think the thing is, we think of ourselves as a startup, as a business. The decentralization of TomoChain will come. But to get there, you need to think about running it like a business. And I don't think of ourselves as just a blockchain platform by itself. So it's not just about doing a bunch of marketing events here and there, just trying to draw up more investors onto the platform. It's about how, if I'm AMD, if I'm Intel, right? How do I get my chips, my computer to be used at the end of the day? That's really what it is, right? And so I have to think of it like a business. I have to think of it like I'm selling a service or a hardware, right? And once it gets to a level where we have enough users on it, where there are enough developers on it, it will by itself take off without our need to push it forward as a company. That's when we can reach that future of decentralization. But until then, true decentralization, where we have a DAO, we have a master of governance, which is dictating the future of the platform, right? Where we have thousands of players who are voting, or millions of players who are actually voting for their decisions, for where they think the company or the blockchain should go. Where the company just becomes a support mechanism for that, as an enabler, but not the driving force. To me, that's the future I want. But today, the reality is the only way to make that happen is you have to be a company first, thinking about it as a startup and think about how do you make your baby grow so that when it finally reaches maturation, it can do its own thing.
Yeah, if you're not faster, easier, cheaper, there's no way that you can get that market foothold. You look at a lot of these decentralized exchanges online right now, and for sure, altruistically, they're the best places to go, but the UI, UX is absolutely terrible. And so everyone uses Binance because it's easy and they're comfortable with it. So I think you're 100% right. You have to treat it as a business in the inception point, become strong then, and then gradually branch out into a space that is more empowered by the community. And, you mentioned a DAO, and I find these are very interesting right now. And they're still really getting hashed out on different structures and voting, voting structures, I guess is the easiest way to say it. And for example, is the direction you guys want to go one vote, one person? Would you be implementing a proof of importance thing? What role would the masternodes be playing into this? And would the masternodes still be the main network validators?
Sure. So I think when it comes to the DAO side of things, it's way too early to be putting down kind of the ground rules in terms of how that'll work. But yes, the masternodes will be the significant players in terms of determining the future because they're the ones who are securing the network. We have 150 masternodes which secure the network. That means that they are the ones that really would be deciding how to structure that DAO and decision-making process moving forward. Ideally, it shouldn't be TomoChain making that decision. We can help with putting together the framework. So talking about the DAO, a DAO, we are going to be starting to work on that structure next year. And it's going to be a slow process because if you look at the DAO space today, any DAO, one of the core issues for it, right? It's the most basic of things. Like what medium do we use for a conversation to talk about a proposal? Do we do on Telegram? Oh, but there's some conversation happening on the forum. Oh, but then there's something happening on Twitter, right? It's hard enough just to consolidate ideas together. Yes. Presenting ideas, consolidating them, knowing when is it important for a member of a DAO to actually put his vote or her vote forward, right? Timing, when is it necessary? I mean, it's like, these are some of those basic things that, forget even trying to just, push a proposal forward. It's like, just the core structure of even getting people to communicate is so hard. So I think that there are smarter people out there who will figure out the right way to do that. Mm-hmm. And I think we will look at that and we'll try to adjust accordingly when we see it, if we see it. But starting off, at least with basic decision-making processes, is going to be important, I think, starting next year. So we'll start the structure out. But no, we don't have an answer for exactly how it should be structured. I don't think anybody does. If they did, then we wouldn't be sitting here today where, just focusing on the basics, right? Yeah. But it'll happen. I think it'll happen. It's just, it takes determination, takes a little time, experimentation. Do we really need everybody to be involved in every decision? That's something that's been talked about recently as well. For sure. In the DAO space, right? So I think understanding how to make things most effective, most efficient in a decentralized manner is going to be there. But coming back, yes, masternodes for TomoChain are going to be a core part of that decision-making process.
Mm-hmm. And you look at EOS right now, I believe they have 23, 24-ish validators on that network, and the majority of them are Chinese or exchanges. They're very hyper-centralized with a very strong agenda. And a lot of people on the EOS network have found this to be a real concern, that it's pulled a lot of power away from the people. And you could almost say, just like if the Bitcoin mining pools got too centralized, if one pool got to close to 51%, you'd say, okay, wow, we really need to diversify it because we have a problem that people with maybe their own self-interest above the platform may be at play here. And so how do you factor into your model, that giving a lot of power to these master nodes and still having balance and decentralization while understanding the scalability of business?
Absolutely. So for one thing, we have 150 master nodes. We are far more decentralized because of that. Number two, for anyone to take over, it's not 50%, 51% attack. It's a 75% attack on TomoChain. So it's much harder. That means that you would need to have 3/4 of our master nodes being controlled by a consortium or a single entity, and then basically being bad actors. For now, it doesn't look like that's the case at all. We have a nice mix of different ecosystem members that are running master nodes, and it's going to be very challenging to have 75% control our ecosystem. So I think that
maybe,
for one, it's not.
Hear it real quick, because I feel like maybe I misspoke or misled the question. Not necessarily in terms of bad actors trying to do a malicious attack and steal all the tokens, and crash the price instantly, but rather, for example, in voting proposals. For example, someone could put forward a vote that says, hey, masternodes should now get paid 10% more fees. And if they're all voting on it and they're all controlling the network, then it's going to get passed.
Right. Yeah, I hear you on that. So that's actually a very good point. I think the thing here is that one thing that EOS is a very good example of what a consortium can do, particularly when that consortium, when that blockchain is actually is more relevant than, say, a number of other blockchains. They have a lot more users relative to the rest of the ecosystem, right? How decisions can be made. And then, but what's happening because of that also is, I don't know if you've noticed it, they're losing DApps as well to other blockchains. And so EOS Knights is moving Tron, at least last that I read. So what happens, I think, is that if the costs start to rise for end users, the gas fees start to rise in this case, then the market mechanisms will take over and it will force people out of the system. I think that's generally what happens. So, for example, real world scenario, San Francisco, it's almost impossible to live there for most people now. They have pushed many people to the Bay Area and then outside the Bay Area itself. It's just too costly. When prices go up, you're going to start losing users. Now, so I think the idea is that if it is a truly decentralized economy we're looking at, with decentralized decision-making, but we have a centralization force that's making all the decisions. The market will make a decision itself. It will decide that, you know what, I don't like what the validators are doing. I don't like the decision-making process. I don't like the fact that my costs are going up. I don't like the fact that things are less efficient. So I'll move elsewhere. And so whether that's existing developers moving elsewhere, whether that's new developers choosing not to work on that platform, whether that's existing user base moving away or new users not coming in, bad decisions will be reflected upon by the market. And so that's what I believe. So I don't think we can force any kind of a consortium or force them from not forming. I don't believe that we can, I don't think we can influence those decisions directly, but I think that they have to think for themselves once it take over what the right decision is. If they want to kill their investment, then that's their choice, I suppose. But ultimately, I think that's how it's going to be run down the road. We'll also have to have it probably when these DAOs are formed, maybe certain votes matter more, maybe certain groups matter more. We'll have to figure out how that works. But if a bad decision is made for the ecosystem, when it's a decentralized ecosystem, then I think that ecosystem will pay for it. And there are plenty of other players coming in that will be happy to take that extra bandwidth. And so I think then you have to start thinking like that, like any company would, or any economy would, competition.
Definitely. I think that's really well said. It becomes a self-regulating mechanism that, the validator can understand. If I do this, then this happens. And there's competition in the space, although you're trying to create synergy.
Absolutely. And I think, and you'll definitely be having examples like this over the next couple of years, right? So you'll have examples of what happens when a consortium forms, when centralization forms, when bad decisions are being made. We'll have use cases that will come out in the news. So then it will also be something that will be kept in the back of everyone's mind when they decide to make decisions like that, or whether to make decisions like that again. So I think we'll have examples which will then set guidelines for a number of the validators and a number of networks in terms of what to and what not to do.
I fully agree. And well, this has been a fantastic conversation, Kyn. Thanks so much for coming on.
Okay, thank you very much. I really, really enjoyed our conversation today. Actually, it was quite fun. Quite fun for me.
So for anyone who's listening online, on YouTube, on our podcast, on Uptrend, check the description. We're going to be running a giveaway. And so just follow the link there. You can join in. And once again, thanks for tuning in. See you next time.